Hello again and welcome to another GCSE Computer Science Theory lesson. This video is going to be on Unit 2 Test Data. Now, in the exam you need to be aware of three different types of test data. One is called typical, the other is called boundary, and the final one is called erroneous or erroneous, depending how you want to pronounce that. This is going to be quite a short video. I'm just going to give you a scenario on examples of test data that you might be using in a program, and that's about it. We'll probably be done in the space of about 2 minutes. Okay, so let's imagine that you're testing a program and that program requires a user input between 1 and 10 inclusive. And when we say inclusive, we mean including 1 and 10. So just to clear up any ambiguity, inclusive means 1 and 10 is included in those values. So a typical test means testing things that should be happening in your code. So a typical bit of test data for this scenario would be 1 or 2 or 10 or 5 or pretty much just any value between 1 and 10 inclusive is your typical data. So 1 is an example, 3, 5 and also 10 is acceptable. I'll come back to boundary in a moment. I'll do erroneous first, or erroneous. Erroneous is anything that shouldn't be typed into your program, anything that is likely to break the functionality of your code or produce an invalid input. So an example of erroneous data could be the word ham, or it could be -1, or it could be 5.7, or it could be 11, or it could be 0. These are examples of erroneous data, things that shouldn't be typed in. The reason why I've left boundary to the last is because it actually involves both of these categories to some extent. So a boundary is anything right on the test boundary of your inputs, and this only usually applies to testing integer values. So something that lies on the boundary would be the value 1, which also overlaps with your typical testing. Something else that lies on the boundary is 10, which again overlaps with typical. Do you know what else is on the boundary? 0, which would be considered erroneous. And also 11. It's still boundary testing because you're testing right on those boundaries, but it's also erroneous. So boundary can overlap between erroneous and boundary. That's everything you need to know. If you want to know in more detail why it is we care so much about boundary testing, then carry on watching, but otherwise you could stop watching this video now. Okay, so the reason why we use boundary testing are for situations like this. Okay, so in this scenario on the screen here, the legal driving age in the UK is 18, I think. I think you can get your provisional license when you're 17, but I think to actually get behind the wheel and get insurance and things like that, you need to be 18 years old. This code is actually incorrect. You can't drive until you're 19 because of the way this code is done. The programmer in this example has mistakenly said more than instead of more than or equal to. So that's an example of why boundary testing is so important in computer science.